calculate and modify how we synchronize our communication system all through tractions. Welcome to 144 division line center location of mind and conception itself. Applied to the location of transparent, into translucent, into X-ray Zulu Foxtrot. All this process in the communication setting to observation mode, process all communications which are patterns of behavior. Understanding code weaving, code tractions, code division locations, understanding communication with matrix, pattern and recognition of time frames, sets, calculations, screen lines, adaptations, set tractions. It's all done through imagination system, through your cores. So we have to understand how to use that information setting at 4 line centers of travel, directing lines of 144 to location, space, and time. That gets in communication of 344, directing lines of 544. Sets communication system. Comes in all communications which you achieve, which you are, and receiving location which they are already done in SPACETIMECREATOR networks. So how do we identify these things? How do we get in that positions? How do we get a true understanding how this all works? Well, there's nothing to process if it's already done, right? But now you're seeing the vision, the cortex, location of creation, which you already set up in your networks and location setting. You let that go. Now you're just creating all at once in real time. Future adaptation doesn't have no bounds of anything. It's just all of it existing yourself, but you're here to identify what you already created. But it's all through the mind itself. There's no projections of location of its body until you identify yourself through imaginations and understand instructions, knowing how to see that location of systems through precogging. Okay, but it's much easier to identify now in setting the sequence location of its travel. This helps you and guides you, guiding you on what you already achieved and what you already know. That communicates in all angles, all points, all communications, high centers, directing ground center to the surface and travels. So this helps you and always informs how we come into our own communication system all through tractions. So, welcome to the mind conception of nothing, which is processing everything in locations that you're not thinking, never were thinking, because it's already done through the thoughts, already done through the actions, already done through the emotions. But staying in observation is processing a lot more easier in clarification, especially when you come into your academies, which are already done through its equation, but understand how to go through the mind and conception of electronics, knowing how to calculate and modify your system all through travel. So, if we can just let everything go and identify everything observing, then you come into all levels of creating. That's a game change planet right there at settings. Setting position lines of panel, process position location to its instance, all through nothing. One signal ground, center lines of service, travels, endpoint lines of graph, and communication lines of angles. But sir, this is just a one. This is just a line. Nope. This is a schematic. It's already done through its equation. You see it as a line. I see it already done through equation. So that's a perception here, here, and here, and here. That's volumes here, 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 and here, and tractions. Understand? Done. There's nothing to do if it's already done. All you're doing is you're identifying what your body's already been through. And you're here observing everything in settings of travel. In a 3 center grounds, in a 3 volume set position. All through a window. All right, so that's you in real time, real scale, real balance, in observation mode. Looking what you've already done through the frames, setting lines at 24 hours and set lines of communication system, all through traction, all through data, all through windows, all through frame. So that's basically it, Try to understand that, and it's all calculated and modified not through yin, because you're already existing, it's all through yang, right? Set calculation lines of its void that puts all communication system all through setting attractions. So intercourse line conditions of pi generates the centers of center, operational no center, operational all center. Travel point lines and sending imagination system to its imagination system information panels, travels its communication and game change the planning, high operation lines of clocking, directing ground center to the surface and direct communication. All done through equation. This is already done. So this is already done at 24-hour. Okay? You get up in the morning, you're visualizing what you're already done in your central systems of 1/3, 1/6, 1/9, and 1/12 set tractions. All through direction, right? Now, once you get in position line, you're in 024, ground centers line position of 48, sets calculation lines of 72, set position of 144, 3 lines of 44, set position of 544, and travel. All through tractions, all through direction, all through the signal. So it's much easier how you modify the days of the week. Sets lines of signals, set lines of ground, set lines of operation system. So everything in spectacle, everything line signal. If you basically come in positions and you go downstairs, right? You see vision come in right away. So the more you come into the nothing, the masses, everything you already done through equation, it's much easier to come into the mind of adaptation of space that sets the volume of empty space. that comes into the silence, and you come into that setting, then you start to see yourself in observation and what you've already done through its vision. That puts everything in its cortex that's already set and designed through theta. Theta is the imagination system that's already set up in attractions, all right? So travels in point lines of graph. So let's say you see a 4 signal, 4 grounds, 4 service, 3 grounds and set position lines of process communications, right? You're looking at this, set lines of screen adaptations, you're seeing 4, 4, 4 in set attractions, right? You're getting up in 6 in the morning, 6 a.m., set lines of 12 p.m., set lines of 3 p.m., set lines of 6 p.m., set lines of 9 p.m., set lines of 12 a.m. is already done through this equation. All you're doing is going through observation. Everything you've done here, 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 and here. Done. Now, once you see the 24 line centers, now you come into creating. That's it. That's it. Now, the faster you come into all lines, all communications of nothing, that process is already what you created. It's just creating itself, right? Clocking centers, clocking screens, clocking communication system, eating this, drinking this, you're just observing everything, right? Now, the more you observe, the more you come into the mind of empty space, that process of communication setting with all calculated and modified. Through your galaxies, your alignment, your intelligence, information, the grounds, the settings, the operation lines, the sequence, anything that you come in panel, anything that you position locations, how many times you watch TV, how many times you go to work, it's already done. But you're processing that through observation mode. Okay, getting into that position. So the more you focus on nothing, then you start to analyze everything that's now already done through its equation. So there's nothing for you to do, but you have to go through it again and again for you to identify what you did through creation is not through a story. There's no beginning, there's no end. You're processing that all levels of the mind. How you process that is to bring that in through projection and all through attractions. All right, observation is everything. Becomes a logical system to all communications through systems and all through attractions, right? Now you guys have a test coming up on your pi, okay, all through the void. Void center operation, attracting centers of 3 centers of travel, 6 lines of setting, anomalies of 9 sequence of 12 lines of measure, okay? Setting 12 line centers, set lines of 1/3 over graph, sets course centers into information settings, travel point lines, docking, directing ground centers. So I need the team just to come into coding through verifications into Voltronic. Center course centers, directing lines. I don't want to see book reports. I don't want to see analyzation. I just want to see you coding. That's it, nothing else. You come into commands, you come into force, you come into recognitions, you know what you're doing. Okay? You're in front of the class, not reporting. You're not giving a book report. You're just getting into coding. You're not showing me, you're not showing the team. You're not showing anybody else, okay, in any way and form. All you're doing is coding. And the more you code, the more you understand the controlling system. And the more you lead your system. When you're leading your system, now you're controlling your polarities. Now you're controlling your egos. Now you're controlling this. Now you're controlling that. And knowing that everything is already in control. Let me say that again. Knowing that everything is always in control because it's already identified through already being in control. So there's nothing for you to do. All you're doing is observing everything that you're already done. But the process at the day that it goes much easier is to create it through your mind of imaginations. Okay? Through your schematics, through your drawings. Okay? Interaction. Okay? You're setting up stories now, guys. You're just identifying what you've already gone through observations. And you understand the patterns and its behaviors. You're understanding the coding, how to break codings, how to see this, how to see that. Right? So let's get into 24 line sequence and 12 lines of panel. Okay, so I'm getting up 6 a.m. I'm identifying what I've already done at 7. I'm understanding what I'm doing at 12, and I know where I'm going to be at 1 p.m. in traction, right? Now, that's all done. Done. That's all done. So you're verifying that. That's observation mode. Now, the team in units has to go faster now in the mind conception of rewinding because they're already in the observation, but to take them out of the observation is the power of intent. Influence of mind manipulations. That's creating now. So you're identifying 6, you're identifying 12, and you know where you're going to be at 1 all at once in the same day in set position of 6 a.m., 12, and 1 p.m., right? Now, if you understand that, you can change the 1 p.m., you can change the 12, and you can change the 6 a.m. It set lines of attractions for the next day. So you set up a 24 sequence, a 48 measure, a 72 channel, and a 140 grounds at set position of holographic gridding. So this is what the team and units are coming into. Out of creation to creating. So setting that up. If not, you're just observing everything. So if somebody's walking in, somebody's walking in now, observational. I'm seeing a lady walking a dog and a man. Now, you can't change that. You're just identifying that through observing that you already created that. So as they go bypassing, it's gone. They're not there anymore. They're out of structure, they're out of design, but they're still on your game. Now, what changes that is what you identify, what you saw through observation. To change that modification, that is the game chain. The game change planner is processing what you already saw through the simulation. To change that, you can bring them back in at a certain hour. Okay? So setting sequence, one centers, almost one position, one team line screen adaptations in 1 p.m. Process then in position locations, the connection system. The woman's going to go back in the house. Now I'm changing things, right? The guy's going to come out and walk the dog. Okay? That's creating. Not what you're seeing already through observation of a pattern, but it's breaking the pattern of behaviors of everybody, which is the matrix itself. Very powerful stuff. So getting specific clocking system, that's all of changing the game plan. Knowing exactly the players that you don't want and knowing exactly the players that you want to bring in. That's creating. But when you're observing things, that's creation. That's ongoing. You're just seeing the observation mode. But if you want to change the observation mode, you can bring them back in or not. They will not come back in because you're in observation, out of observation, in tower, lines of communication of power of intent that change the influence of minds and system. That's how I was able to control the NPCs. Okay, all through the mind imagination. All right, so let's clock the system lines of travel, direct lines of grounds. Okay, so I'm sitting in a chair. I'm sitting in my chair. Okay, this is me sitting in my chair. All right, now I'm looking at screen lines adaptations of flux, open window, panels, tree formation system, somebody walking their dog and sending in travel. Okay, somebody walking their dog, right? Now, what you have to understand, once they leave the scene, it's now creating. All you're seeing is observation in a certain time setting that you already set up through its clocking system through time. Now, getting in that communication, a part of acceleration of time measure. Change the scales and position of future adaptation, existing and evolving and expanding yourselves. So once something comes out of your provision, of your parameters and parameters, you're now in all levels of creating. That's where you can change things now because they're out of frame. But you're seeing them in observation mode. You saw them already, but not through a story. Okay? Because you see the patterns now. You're break coding things. You're understanding how to use that through undevelopment, understanding the exposures, directing lines of signals in that cross communications. And the more you get specific, you can bring that person out in set position and change that information to its avatar. Change different lines of communication. Change the clothing lines of attractions. Change the communication of its clothing. Somebody's wearing something else. That's control. That's modification. That's programming. That's existing. That's evolving. That's expanding. Very powerful stuff. All through operation. Oh. So to analyze that is to observe everything first. Right? All right, so 7 a.m., I got to go to work. Right? So you're observing what you already done, right? To change that is to get everything out of frame. So everything's in a box frame. Okay? Once they leave the frame, guys, pay attention now. Once they leave the frame, okay, you're in creating. You're not in observation anymore. You're in creation. What you saw, that's observing. And everything around you is its own consciousness that's running its own setting of its own programmers, of its own operation system. Now, once they leave the frame, you're now in control. So you can bring them back in and set position now. That's a game change planner. Okay, and you want them to walk in this direction. Now they're over here in setting traction. Okay? But you're controlling and now you're submitting to its current of its flow. So I'm just getting you guys in the obstacles, how you understand what you're seeing is observing. Once they're out of frame, it's now creating. Bringing them back in, that's creating. What you saw is creation. So it's creation of creating every single time. That's why they have an equal sign of communication setting of its platforms. You see them here, right? And you're here. You're seeing them in tractions in division. But once they leave the parameters of your system, they're out through equations, right? But you can bring them back in at a certain time and scale, right? So you want them over here. You want them on this platform, right? And you want them over here at a certain time. You can bring them in this calculation through its setting, all through observation. So you're always in observation mode. You can't get out of that because observation is the reality real time. That basically you're the future of existing all levels of set position. Sets lines of communication to its clocking system. Clocking foundation, everything attractions, right? So I know it's getting a lot more complicated for the team and the units, but this is how you perceive things in your realities of your VR system to understand how to come into that through attraction. Energy attracts in set position. So you got to understand how to surrender to its current of its flow, how to surrender to the water, how to surrender to the air, how to change this, how to change that. You can't do that until they leave the scene because it communicates confusion of everything you already set yourself into. But once they leave the parameters, you're now creating because they left the scene. That's what it is. And then you can time scale, time measures, time position to a system, bring in attractions. No, I don't want to see that person until 3 p.m. Done by equation. Okay, platform 1, platform 2, or platform 3 in travel. Sending direct signals over in sequence. You're observing here, there's your body, observing 3 centers of travels and communications. Right, so once they walk out of frame, you're now in creating. Okay, which is amazing, right? Time measures and scales are real lines of communication with remote, recharging core centers of remote control, putting process in communication system all through settings, all through operation, right? So again, this is what you can do if you're just creating now, because you're out of observation. More powerful now, because you're just creating itself, which is volume and expanding itself. This is what it is, all right? So once you understand the observation mode, you're here, and you want to basically understand what you want to do is you just want to create the day. You still have to go to work, but you're identifying you just didn't already go to work. You're now creating a new cycles of work. So you want to change the day, you want to change the year, you want to change the month, you can do whatever you want, right? Remember, it's always in the same day signal. You're not in a position of years, days, months, and sit lines until you understand how to codify your system and travel. That puts lines of binary to an arbitrary line and reset lines of position location to understand how to use that through default, enabled, embedded your system's lines of travel, directing core centers of 024 and clocking screen adaptation. All right, so setting sequence lines of panel. All right, so once you understand the observation mode, okay, I want to go to work, but I want to signal lines of centers. I want 3 grounds of service of 3 lines of signal locations. I want to clock my system at 12 p.m. Line course centers, line directions, and setting line communication setting. My boss is going to come at 2 p.m. I'm going to leave at 2:45 in traction. You set out the day through just creating, which is the highest formations of the mind itself, which is already done through its imaginations. So when I say done, you're just ongoing existing yourself and evolving yourself. So we program your systems all through tractions of the simulator that's already set up. So when you set something up, you already know it's done through its equation, but you understand the game, you understand the change. So when I set things up, I set it up before I get there, all through traction. It's already done, right? That's how you set up the day, right? So that's why you have to stop worrying about these things until you understand what's really going on with your systems, how to come into the creations of what you already created through creating. Creation is understanding what you already done through creating. So when you're creating, when you're going somewhere else at different frequencies, you're seeing what you already created. So now you're in observation mode again. So it's a mind switch, observing, right? So I'm observing a lady right now in a cane. She's wearing white and she's wearing black pants in that position. So once she leaves the frame in that position, that's all. It's the game changer. Processing that. So if you don't want that individual on your game plan, she won't come in position. That's what it is in the VR setting. Right? Crossing line course sends a clocking communication with all settings. So, and now another line course centers, there's a guy in a blue jacket walking his dog. Now it's in frame, I'm just observing. Observational, right? Now when he bypasses through the frame, I'm now creating. Out of observation mode. So you're always in observation, which is everything you see through consciousness. So you have to understand how to mind control your imaginations all through simulators, creating simulators and simulators and simulators that you already see through its equation, through the rewind, right? Process of 1, platforms of 2, platforms of 3, set course centers, prophecies lines of setting, clocking centers of travel, directing lines of 12 p.m., 6 p.m., and 9 p.m., setting travels in the communication system, all through directions, single location, and setting, all right? So if you can identify that you ate a bag of chips, you have to identify you're already going to eat that bag of chips. It's for you to already understand that. That's observation mode. You're just understanding what you've already done. So it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you say. You're just observing yourself. But you have to understand the observation so you understand what's going on next. So you're in the creations, and every time you come into out of observation mode, you're seeing everything what you've done through creation. So once you do that, now you're creating something new, right? All right. A very powerful one I'm giving you guys now. And you do it through pi. Directing from here, you've already done this. So it's identifying your files that comes to you through its subtractions, all through settings, all through balance. Coming to you already, right? Now, the more you formulate that, you can change the division lines of time. Change the particle acceleration system, all through tractions, all through particle, all through setting, all through operation system, all through set position. Okay? So, but it's very important how this comes in all communication system, all through traction. How you set up the day, right? But you can't do that until you see everything bypass. That's bypassing. Now you guys are at 544. That's a triangulation line course centers that puts position on all of and communication of existing all at once, but also seeing the creation, right? What you already set up through creation, which is already observations, but not through a story. No story, no beginning, no end. So there's no thinking, there's no thoughts, there's no actions, because that's already done through its equation. Going through the observation is very powerful stuff, but you start to see the conscious of its awareness and how you see the matrix and how you see the patterns and how you see the strategies, puts everything together and position your pieces and puzzles and travel. So once you understand how to understand that, then you understand how to set positions and know exactly how it aligns your system all through travel, okay, all through pi. So it's kind of like, what we have to start identifying more levels in a higher line communication, how to use imagination and create the stories. Creating story is identify the stories already created. But to modify that, if I want to see what I already created, I have to collapse the timeline. So it doesn't affect me already in creation of creating. Creation of creating through co-creating, it doesn't matter. You just identify what's already done through your networks of your body. And the more you come into nothing, and the more you come into mass of everything of flow, then you come into all those of nothing, the process of nothing that you've always been in. Not what you're coming into, not what your provisions of, not what you're understanding. You're just all levels of what you already are in. It's just existing and evolving and expanding yourselves. You already know what you've done through creation. Now, if you want to see that again, you have to collapse another timeline. Okay? But you can't change timeline that's already done through its equation. Because the brain has already set up the conversion. And the mind is just all of the creating. Right? But the mind, the brain, the heart, and the soul, and the body is aligning its systems now. It's creating its own self through modulation. And everything around you of its own consciousness is also creating its own system. It's still going to be tethered and attached to you, but it's going to be in its own provision of its own cycle, of its own space and own time. It's done its job. Okay? Now it's creating its own setting of its own self. You understand that? Its own CPU. Expansion comes in all ways and forms. Through creations, how you see that in observation mode, how you see that in triangulation, how you see that in reset, how you see that in position of programming or location setting, access, location of what you are in programmers, right? But how you detect the day changes everything of the day itself in a 24 sequence, in a 24-hour and travel, okay? So you set the seconds, minutes, and hours in set positions because now you're in creative mode of creating, right? Creative mode is line signal, process setting, process communication. There's the system, right? Process lines of signals, process over cross locations, process line division location setting and travel. Okay? Directing lines of 3 parameters, course centers through pi and travel communications. Setting course centers are location grids and travel communication and setting. Oh, look at that, disappeared right away. Location grid. Okay? Cross symbolism, Fibonacci lines, square roots, setting course centers and position lines of time. But you always have to set up a schematics. So the body knows exactly what it's traveling through and set location system through observation. All through travel, all through calculation, right? Directing grounds, electrical lines of communication of dimensional doors. Signify course centers of communication lines of calculation. Direct course centers, black holes, wormholes, line acceleration system, 1/3 set, process lines of 2/4, set position 3 p.m. Set tractions, clocking centers of travel, directing ground centers of zeros, set lines into hemispheres, process lines of stratospheres, biospheres locations, setting lines, set position location, hour line centers, travel point lines of graph, more an imagination system, allocate time frames, change communication system, all through travel. Done by equation. Okay, that's creating through a 24 setting. That's already done. So when I get there, it's already set. It's already set. Now when it's set, it runs its own system. Now it goes in observation mode until I get there. So when I get there, I'm now controlling it. It's amazing. So I just created through observation, and when I get there, I'm in control now. Which is so powerful, I'll tell you. It's unbelievable. You just let things go, you know? But that's what you set up. You set up the simulator, and when it gets there, it runs its system by itself, runs the program, self-engineering. That's where it comes into anything that you see through waterfall, how you see anything through anything line communication, sending through wind factors, or anything in travels, or anything in direct location system. But you're constantly seeing everything in observation mode. What changes that is you set up the structure. And when you get there, you're now creating, or what you saw through creation. You're taking everything in observation mode. Now you're creating in that position to its system, your central mode, your hyperdrive. You come into that position locations, you start to break these things down. But you can't control a simulator until you extend the identifications of you through observation. Right? So you get there, okay, this is going to be set up. That's over here in setting. So you set it up before in your minds, right? It's already done through its equation, clocking, and set lines of sequence. Set line positions, overline centers. Table is going to be set over here. Clocking is going to be over here. People over in this directions. People are going to be walking through the mall in this setting and line communication. It's already set up through the simulator. So when you get there, everything's operated and runs its program. Out of observation. Now you're controlling step by step by step. You're breaking down the film strip. You're breaking down the frames. You're breaking down the windows. Understand that? But you're breaking things down. You're seeing the patterns. You're seeing the behaviors. You're seeing the matrix. Okay? You're seeing the timelines. All levels of existing all at once. Where everybody's in set positions. So that's where you control here, here, here. Breaking down and coding in pre-line course centers. Sending lines of communication system all through traction. Right? So it's very powerful when you understand what you're doing, right? What you're doing is knowing exactly what you've already done. That's a constant continuous, has a constant continuous flow of a consistency location setting that puts every location system, oscillation system, the oscillators. Directing ground center location setting, all you're doing is setting up the simulation of the day. It's already set up. So when you get there, you press run. Now you're controlling everything around your systems, but you're breaking things down. You've already set up the simulator, so there's nothing to control. When you get there, you're in control, completely in this system. So you're looking at the observations, you see running the setting, all operations set, relation system, changing time scale, time measure, time balance, time positions, all through tractions, right? So setting up the day, okay, is creation. Seeing it go through is creating through observation. So there's always ways of looking at this, because the one thing that doesn't get you in confusion is you're always expanding yourselves. But you're always in observation. Observation is just on looking and watching yourselves. That's all it is. You're running a film strip. You're running a picture. You're running a set position. You're running a window. You're running its own system. So when you get there, it's already set up through its simulator. Right? Press run and you're watching it. That's observing. But you're also seeing it through creating of what you already done through creation. All right? All right, so I got a woman here right now and a baby and a dog, right? So I'm just observing. So either I keep observing in that positions or I change that in factor. So either she doesn't come back in or I want her to come back in. Understand? It's not about mind control. It's about the constant continuous control that you have through power of intent. So understanding the position location to its clocking system. Every intel has its own correlation setting of time that measures its correlation screen that they come into your system. There's nothing you can do. You're just observing what you've already done. So to identify that is seeing the pattern, seeing the routine, seeing the schedule, seeing the itinerary, seeing the day, seeing the month, seeing the year. Okay? Now, the more you identify that, the more it gets easier to see what's going on. Through observing, seeing the objective, what do you want to do? Right? How do you want to set up the day? So you're setting up the day through what? How are you setting up the day? Right? Your creation is coming from creating. And when you get there, you're seeing the creation of what you are in creating. Right? Setting settings, process, calculation system, all through tracks, right? That's how you set up. So when you're here, your body's here. It's going here in platform, and now it sees the structure, how it's set up the day. Right? So you're here now. Okay, you already saw what you already set up. So now you're basically looking through observation mode, central mode, hyperdrive. You can put lines in all communication where you change the frequencies, right? So the avatar is comfortable as it goes into its building of itself. That's creating. Taken out of observation. Observation mode is everything through observance. Now that process, how you see things in all different angles, but you're constantly understanding how to come into your positions because the team and units have to choose and use that through all calculations. Now, how to identify that is through Voltronics, is to communicate in all over the set position, your imagination system that sets the codification system all through tractions. Directing grounds of 4 signals, 6 lines of center, 8 lines of track location system. Right? So this is you setting up the day. All through this, and this in traction. You're setting up the day. All through schematics, all through settings, all through operation. Right? So when you get there, you're in full control. It's that traction. All right? Because you set it up. And when you set these things up, it takes you out of observation mode, puts you into the power of intent, comes into the influence, and setting lines of the VR setting and rotation system. And once you leave the scene, everything around the system disappears. It can't stay in grounds because it never existed. You can't have something exist until you understand the existence of everything in tractions. Process in that position puts all over the calculation setting. Everything disappears and then reappears at a different frequencies of a different simulator, setting in position lines of travel, all through tractions. Okay? It disappears. You disappear. Your body disappears and goes somewhere else. So you constantly create the observations into the central mode, to the hyperdrive, central drive, main drive. But everything you can position, your body constantly creates simulators that it's already set up in time and scale and measured. You're always in the future. You're always existing in the future. You just understand observation of what you already created and set lines of communication setting to imagination. Boom. So now you're somewhere else creating an observation system through instructions, directing seeing lines of grounds, all through setting. Okay? So that's why everything never touches ground until we perceive the precogs of cognates. The intuitives, the setting, the travels, the directions, the inventories, how to communicate to the high lines of formation lines and settings, processes, attractions, right? So basically, it's much easier to identify these things and set up before you get there because you know exactly you're in basically understanding what's going on with you. You're observing everything and affirmation setting. So you're running everything that's going on in your system. So, and when you break these things down, you start to see the pattern. And then basically you can't take things out when it's running its own system. It has to go through its own operation. Okay? You have to go through that. You have to because it's set up. If you set it up in a certain time, that's all it is. You can't override something that's already existing, which you already created through its existing itself through observation. So it's important you understand what you're doing and why you're doing this, how to get out of this, how to get out of that through time, right? So let's say you're at a party and you set the volume and mass. So let's get in track centers, indirect location system, all through setting, right? So you already saw the vision, all through window, right? Now you're just understanding how to change that, how you want to change the flux. Let's put it in 8th dimension. Clocking centers at 24. Setting sequence over correlations. Setting communication of the settings. Reclamation bin. You can change the structure of the design. Command centers over here. Window frames over here. I travel. So you set it up, right? And you got 6 people that are going to be there because you already saw it in vision. You already saw it in creation and setting, right? So you're here. You're already seeing the vision. It's already done through its creation, right? But you're looking through the open window now and setting. Okay? So when you get there, they say, well, I don't like this. I want to put this over here. I don't like that. I don't want it there. That's creating now. So you're taking your observation mode. You change the information setting into grounds. You change the simulator and set positions and add it through its equation through traction, right? So these are the things you can do once you understand the observation of creation of creating. Powerful, isn't it, guys? So as we get a true understanding of how this all works, we get a lot more understanding how to see it through pi. And that's what it is. The 24 lines of pi is already done. And for you to perceive that is through observation mode. For you to understand that is through creation. For you to understand that is through creating. So in that creation is knowing exactly what you already saw. Okay? Is the creation already that's already set. So understanding creation is understanding creating. Okay? So we all have to understand how this all works now. How you identify what's going on as you're just observing, right? So what you have to understand, I brought nobody in setting. Nobody's coming down this aisle because I'm controlling it now, right? I'm controlling the outline, I'm controlling the inline, I'm controlling everything in observation. There's nobody here. There's no dogs, right? That's true understanding. So if I'm not in control of myself, then these things come in through programming. Then they come in through egos. Then they come in through entrapments. Then they come from other universal locations, dynamic galaxies. But if you're in control of your system, nothing's coming in. You're not observing anything. You're just observing yourself through creating. Okay? That's how powerful your mind is, for you to understand that through attractions. Okay, so setting lines of formula, we got an E square. Now, E square sets the flux over lines of E factor. Sets course centers lines existing over frame, 3 centers of travel. Let's get a direct line link, patterns, and direction of time frame. The more you come in your imaginations, the more you identify your creations into your stories that puts position, location, and measure and formulate the location setting through your pi. Okay, so setting lines of panel, process lines of box. Triangulation inside box and set lines. Remember, everything's a story. Everything is a story. Everything you do is a story. Right? It doesn't matter if it's 10 seconds. It doesn't matter if it's 10 minutes. It doesn't matter if it's 10 hours. But understand that seconds, minutes, and hours puts everything lines of the earth, how you see it in vision, how you see it in space. Space is always going to be faster. Attractions. But earth and space has to be balanced in position, location, and systems now. You've got to get in alignment. So your mind is going faster, which is slower. So the mind is more collaboration of the brain is more collaboration of the soul that's identifying the body through its alignment in all lines of sequence and line communication system. There's still nobody here. But what's coming in setting when I set attractions? A white car. I set that up. Now it's running its own observation of me just seeing it through creating. Because I brought it in. See? That's time. That's measure, that's scale, that's balance. That's you controlling. How you see things out of observation in your correlation settings of balance, travel. All right, so setting lines of one atom, rotation lines of creative cycles, 2 centers of operation sequence, 3 centers of grounds, 3 travels, point lines of graph, and center course centers line communication system, all through configuration. Okay, all through identification codes, directing ground center location system. So the more you come into your imagination core, it sets lines of tones, it sets the operation settings all through flux and travel. Okay? All through directions, all through setting, all through communication. All right? Look at this. Guess who's coming back in attractions? The woman, the baby, and the dog. All right, so now I'm just observing. So in that position lies the high direct signals and location. So This is where you have to understand the controlling mechanisms of what you control and what you can't control, right? That's allowing things to go. Okay, so I'm just observing everything, right? So there's always ways of looking at things, but there's a lot of frequencies that you have to start to identify yourself, is to master yourself first of what you've already done through observation, because it's already done through its equations. So all you're seeing is what you're already seeing. You don't need to identify it. You don't need to set it up. The only difference is you're doing it in the mind now. And that gets you out of your thoughts of thinking and no thinking of thoughts. There's no actions because there's no emotions because that's already done through its equation. But you stay in observation mode, but it's all on communication system. Now she's going back the other way. So we understand how to come into that track communication with setting off through operation. All right. So this is where you come into provision. How many times is she going to go, right? And once she comes out of frame and set lines of communication setting, she's not going to come back. Okay. So she did this way, she did this way, and she went this way, and then she knows she stays in her house. All through traction. Okay? So you have to understand how to get in the observation mode and observe everything first. And how you create it through your mind and imaginations, guys. But not through a story. No beginning to no end. Is a constant, continuous flow that you have to start recognizing through your blocking, through your foundations, to your systems of your sin. And that's where you come into your higher self, your avatar, and overlooking what you already are in provision. It's just existing, evolving, and expanding yourselves. But to understand the observation mode, puts all of your networks and all through tractions, right? See? She's back in her house. So you have to understand what's controlling your system and who's controlling your system. Who's driving the car? Are you driving the car or somebody else driving the car? Which means you're not understanding the patterns of what you created through the simulation, of the different layers of the game. Understand the characteristics, understanding the role they're playing, right? You got to understand yourself first, is to master yourself of what you generate and how you brought it in. Not what you're seeing through observations, right? I'm seeing a man and his son going inside a house, right? Now, what you have to start identifying in that positions, are they going to come out? Are you controlling that? No. Are your provisions that controlling that? No, because you don't understand the mastering of you through sin. You don't know your simulation until you understand everything about observation that's already set up through this equation. And that's where it comes into Groundhog Day. He had to go through 150 days to become all levels of what he isn't, to identify what he always was. So knowing exactly all that through timeline, okay, in that position, walking over here, talking to this person, walking over here, this happens. So he starts to identify that he's God, the geometric operation design. So he knows everybody because he's going through the same pattern. He's recognizing the pattern. You don't recognize the pattern until you break the pattern. And when you break the pattern, you're breaking the strategy. And now you understand the pattern behavior of everything that's everybody in of his story that never existed in the first place. When you break the pattern, you see the coding. You codify your system, you really understand. So they're in the house right now. Are they going to come out? You don't have control of that until you identify yourself. Understand? And the only way to understand that is for you to go through all of the observations. Then you understand your timeline. It's just all of us are just existing, evolving, and expanding yourselves. Because every time you're getting in position, you're always in the future of everything. There's no provision in the past, there's no provision in the present, and there is no provision in the future if you're already existing already. For you to identify that is truly what you observed already through creation. So mastering yourself in all different levels of your game puts you in all lines of all infinitive items that you put yourself into of its presence. Because there is no tomorrow, because it's always time here, existing and evolving ourselves. All you're seeing is the pattern of everything. All right? It transcends in location of existence. All right? So it's very powerful when you just let everything go because there's nothing to process. You're just reminding yourself of what you already know in traction. Okay? You're here to come into traction now. And it's definitely not through a story. So there's nothing to chase if you're already seeing it through all levels, right? Setting clock centers of change the formula as lines of question that correlates the system time scales, balance communication lines of surface. And what's going to be in the provision location of set lines, right? The son, the father, and the mother are now leaving, right? Now, what you understand, you have no control of that. You don't know what time they're going to come out, right? So they're going out. You have no time when they're coming back until you understand your parameters and your parameters of your simulation of itself. You have to master yourself and clock yourself first to understand what you are observing is everything a pattern, everything's strategy, everything's a breaking code, everything lines of settings, all through operation, all right? All right, say forming equation lines, directing lines of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols are clocking centers of zero and travel. Okay, so everything I'm saying is all levels of existing, all in centers, right? So I can platitude, division lines, XD1, and set lines of travel. Mothership and travel communications. Directing lines of 3 symbols, 3 tractions, 6 lines over 9, 12 set lines of 0 lines of 24, calculation lines of 0, 1, 0, 3, and 0 lines of 6. Okay, that's already done. Travel position lines, modification ground, set location, system, alter travel. Now, I'm setting something up that's not set up yet. But it will be set up on a certain time, in a certain frame, and certain calculations of certain measure and scale of balance. All right? So, in setting lines of position locations, identifying what you already saw is identifying what you always are, is the future of everything that's constantly existing and evolving yourselves. But you've got to understand how to use it through observation first of what you've already done through creations. Now, through a story, no beginning to no end, is a constant continuous flow through internal and external force interactions, right? So what I'm setting up is not set up yet. It's interactions. So far beyond everything, right? 36,000 line centers of clockings, directing lines of triangulates and flux, ground centers of 0, 12, 24 line measure, 48 scales, 72 clocking into 144 grounds. Setting sequence, time measure and scale. Okay, process line positions. Tuesday, 6 a.m. will be set up and travel. Boom. That's going to be set up for tomorrow. That's creating. But when you see it, you're seeing it through creation. Okay? That's how it's set up. So you set something up that's already set up. But you can't set something up and turn your center yourself through observation first. All right? So that's communication, ongoing conversation with XC1000s. If I apply it to my vision location system, I can set up the next day, right? Wednesday screen, 7 p.m. Signature lines, AI, correlates to setting, login in space, travel and position on point lines of graph, signature lines as high centers, operation lines of sequence. XT1 platform is going to set up a travel in 4 signals and ground centers of social communications. That's going to be set up for 7 p.m. on Wednesday. See, that's creating. And when I see it through creation. So I get there, and now, and what? What am I now in positions of? Controlling everything I'm seeing, which is observation. Now, if I want to change that, I can change the directions. Okay, I don't like that signal, take that out. Let's clock the system lines of settings, process in 30, setting direct signals at grounds, sonar, echo, Zuler, Fox location. Right, that's already set up, right, for Thursday. That's 6 p.m. That's Thursday. Let's go to Friday. Same structure, same division, same locations, right? Set positions of Friday, offline Thursday, changing the ground centers. Process in Wednesday, process in Monday. Set calculation of Sunday. I can go back in time now. Remember, it's nothing to change because it's all of us are creating. Setting sequence, collapsing timeline centers, process lines of indication setting, clock line centers back in 0. All done through equation. And that's how you come into all of just creating. But you got to understand the observations first of everything that you see, which is its own concept, its own system. But it's very powerful when you come into that setting, just through creating itself, not through creation. Creating is what you're setting up. Creation is what you're seeing, which is already done. The directions, operation, network is you just existing. So you're constantly creation of creating at the same time. Direct and redirect, direct and redirect. That's all you're doing. In position of symbolism, that process every location setting. Having ongoing conversations. XT4, XT1, XT panel, probing into orbs. 3 signal lines at grounds is going to be set up, and next Thursday in travel. Done. So next Thursday, it's all going to be set up. And when I see it through creation. Then I see it running its own system, right? It's not set up yet, but it's already done. All through setting, all right? So once you get in that position, you're going through high lines, your time jumping setting, all through generations. 3 generations, 6 generations, 9 to 12 generations, 24 dimensions, setting sequence into 50,000 scale, cross line angles, process line direct signals, operates line settings, detecting high centers of force, communicates setting. The sun is going to be operating line course settings of yin and yang, process lines that indicates setting of platforms and traction. All done. Next Friday, it's all going to be set up. So when I see it through creation. Okay? So when you prolong things and change the frames, now you're creating. Okay? So it's amazing when you really understand how to set this up in your 7-day window through window frames and your track frames, your correlation setting to your panels. Processing that indication setting is your light codes, correlation settings into your pillars of light. Pillar sequence off cross line, setting line, direct signal, of course, centers 3 travels point communications, tethers over screen dictation. Okay? Indicates the course, directing lines, and 2 links high centers 2 weeks from Friday. Flux over line has the course lines of channel, direct lines of signals. It's going to process the ground course centers in correlation setting to travel. Next Friday is going to be set up. So when I get there, it's already set up through creation. It's already done. So I just continue on the path and just keep existing, involving myself. I already know it's done because it's already created and setting. I already see it through its timeline. You guys have to come into your own timelines out of observation, just into creating itself. So it's very powerful. 3 weeks from Sunday. 3 weeks clocking centers of 0, 24, lines of 48, 72 scales, 75,000 line measuring scale. Calculation lines of flywheel, sets communication system, traction, division location system, planetary line centers, solar direct signals, ground centers of service, process lines of Pluto, direct lines of Mercury, line conditions of Saturn, operates lines in Neptune, process calculates lines and course centers of travel, has a direct line length. The clocking system is going to open all channels of communication. Done. That's 3 weeks on Sunday. That's going to be set up. So when I get there, I see it through creation, runs its system by itself. So I'm just there observing everything that I've already done through creations of creating. Right there. It's all set up, right? So I know it's a lot to take in, eh, guys? But it's a lot more fun when you just let things go and just come into the creation itself. Right? But you have to understand your observation modes. And that's where you observe everything. That's created its own self, its own system of its modulations. But nothing through story. All you're doing is self-telling the operations or readjusting you through all levels of existing in set tractions. Self-telling operation, readjusting you. Okay, coming into different lines of settings, process communication lines of 0 gravity, position lines of 7 lines of track centers, and set position operation and sequence in set tractions. All right, so let's get a triangulation system. Let's get into 2 months. Okay, 2 months is not done yet. It's going to be in a triangulation flux, crossing angles of force. 3 signals, 3 grounds of service, set pyramid 1, pyramid 2, set 4 tractions and clocking centers of grounds in a 0-24 line. Set a position 48 measure. Panels operates lines of sequence and platforms over C. Correlates the settings of travel, direct lines and links over panels, and indicates the system all through tractions, all through flux. That's going to be set up on that day. So when I get there, I see it through creation, and then it operates its own system, observes its own setting, goes on its own operation system. So I'm just observing everything I've already done through creation of creating. Okay. Gypsy's going, whoa! You got that? So what I'm setting up is already done. There's nothing for general to do because it's all set up. Because I already know what I've done. But the constant lines of all communication set to control everything is already set up through observation, through your attractions, 3 directions, 3 locations, 3 imaginations. It doesn't matter. It's all done. But the done is the directions for you just come into all levels of you just existing, what you saw through creation of creating. Okay? It's very powerful what you guys are coming into now. But you got to let go of everything and stop creating stories that don't exist because it overrides where you are of just existing. Okay? You just come into here to identify what you've already done through attraction. I know you guys have a lot of questions in that positions, but it's very powerful what we're coming into now. The mind conception of everything, right? Through its inception. See you in 5.